Hello and welcome to ITAM and the quest for executive management support. How do we get executives to support IT asset management? Well, that is our quest and our journey for today. But let's first understand what motivates executives and how we can best craft our message so that they can listen and understand its importance. I want you to realize something. When an idea makes it to an executive, it's not a bad idea. It's a question of whether it is good enough to be better than other ideas. That's what an executive must do. Decide between what is better, what is best, and what is just good. So an ITAM message is not a bad thing. It's just not seen as a great thing. We must understand the mindset, thinking, and what motivates executives. I've been in industry for a very long time, and I've had the opportunity to work with executives and observe, listen, and understand what motivates them. Indeed, situations will vary. Still, in my experience with executives across the globe, they all have very similar motivations. Let's start, though, by first talking about business assets, because you're going to find out how this leads directly to their motivation. Business assets directly affect an organization's revenue, profit, and costs. Assets to consider would include planes, trains, machinery, and ships. And then there's the ugly stepchild, IT. IT assets are treated differently. Very few organizations understand how critical IT is to their business. Why are they treated differently? An airline executive knows the performance of the planes every day. Likewise, it is for manufacturing executives and their manufacturing assets. Same for executives of shipping companies. There is a direct connection between the business asset and revenue and profit. So let's look at some examples of where IT was treated as a second-class citizen. For our first example, let's look at the Southwest Airlines meltdown. According to industry tracker FlightAware, on the night of December 26, 2022, one of the busiest travel days of the year, Southwest canceled over 2,800 flights, which was around 70% of all of their flights. The result? In an interview with LA Times, the Southwest Airline Pilots Association Vice President Michael Santora said the U.S. Transportation ordered Southwest to pay a $140 million civil penalty. The catalyst was the big storm. Our internal software, he said, can't handle massive calculations. The company hasn't invested the money into scheduling infrastructure to support the network they had developed. Critics said that's because Southwest failed to fund the technology needed to match its growth, which dates back to Southwest co-founder Herb Kellogg. So since the beginning, CEO after CEO hasn't prioritized IT very highly. Let's look at another example of cybersecurity. According to IT Governance in 2023, over 8 billion records were breached. That's a billion with a B. According to an IBM report, the global average cost of a data breach in 2023 was over $4 million, a 15% increase over the last 3 years. Again, according to IBM, 51% of organizations plan to increase security investments due to a breach, including incident response planning and testing, employee training, and threat detection and response tools. Without an attack surface management solution, IBM found that organizations took 260 days to identify a data breach and another 77 days to contain it. That's over 300 days, or about 11 months. Let's be honest. Though investment in a cybersecurity program adds zero value to the organization will probably have zero value without one. So it's critical for organizations to have a cybersecurity plan. Here's one of my favorite observations. Even though IT touches every dollar, euro, yen, or pound, Made and spent by the organization and is behind every customer touch, executives still do not consider it as significant as other business assets. So how do we get here? Well, let's look at the evolution of IT. In the beginning, there was the mainframe computer. Now we're talking about the 1950s and 60s and the 70s, of course. But this thing was a behemoth. Then something sprung up, something called the personal computer. The first PC I was given at the office cost over $20,000. An Apple Watch has more power than that now. Next was the laptop, and this was the beginning of mobility for technology users, or users of technology, I should say. No longer were you bound to your desk. You could go anywhere in the office, as long as you could connect to a physical cable, because Wi-Fi wasn't that great back then, but you could work standalone. You could take it with you on a plane. You could take it with you on a train, on a boat, or in a car, near and far. Following the laptop was the smartphone, which was the end of IT-driven technology and the beginning of consumer-driven technology. That was a huge, huge disruptor. Next up was the tablet, which was confusing to some people. Was it a laptop? Not quite. Is it a phone without the ability to make calls, but with a much larger screen? Kind of. To me, the tablet is an information and entertainment portal, capable of playing a great game of solitaire, which in the beginning I saw a lot of people doing at the airports. Next was the cloud. It's IT as a service, enabling work from anywhere, making IT a utility where you pay for what you use. Something that was predicted many years ago is artificial intelligence. We're still trying to figure it out, the impact of it, but it will be the biggest disruptor since the invention of the microprocessor. As you may have noticed, as technology matured, IT's technology administration went from centralized to decentralized. What enabled decentralization? Well, assets were easier to use. It was so convenient for me to reach over and hit the reboot button on my $20,000 PC, something they would never let me do in the mainframe computer, plus it would be rebooted a lot faster. Cost per asset drastically dropped. And yes, my desktop, which was $20,000, quickly plummeted and became significantly cheaper than your mainframe computer. So the result was the IT budget was decentralized, spreading out IT costs, making it more challenging to understand the return on investment, the total cost of ownership, and how to manage. My next observation is how ITAM was a natural part of IT in the mainframe days. Let's face it, no one bought a mainframe computer on their credit card and expensed it. And the mainframe architecture was centralized. The high cost of an IT asset dictated centralization regarding approvals and purchases. This means the ITAM profession is relatively young, younger than IT. Imagine what the accounting profession was like when it first started, or the medical profession with doctors operating on patients while smoking a cigar. The ITAM profession is only about 30 years young. And this youth probably explains the confusing message coming from within the industry. In some markets, you see a lot of talk about SAM, but not ITAM. Companies are offering SAM services, yet ITAM or HAM is not even mentioned. Service providers make outlandish statements like, if your FinOps implementation is working well, you probably don't need ITAM. And now, of course, we have artificial intelligence. Even the high-cost research and consulting firms are inconsistent in their ITAM messaging. But one thing is certain, and that is executives do not like uncertainty, especially when you ask them to invest. Executives want to know what their competitors are doing and how it impacts their organizations. These two things, ease of use, lower costs, significantly impacted how executives viewed IT budgets. They lost sight of it. They lost sight of the details. It was so easy during the mainframe computer era, so very easy. You spent millions of dollars on this massive box. I mean, physical inventory, one box, one asset. You're done after counting to one. But that box was placed on something called a platform in a room with a secured access. The company that I first worked at would bring their customers by and peer through the windows to see these guys in white shirts and clip-on ties installing tapes, mounting discs, and typing something into a terminal. And they could see the result of what they paid for. By the way, the mainframe computer, it was the first cloud architecture. Well, one of the first. It's a little bit of a stretch, but there were others. But cloud's not that new. The result is this. Executives lost an understanding. They lost insight on, well, if I spend my money here, 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 and here, in 20 different places, what's my return on investment? But with decentralization came the loss of control. IT no longer administers all technology. Allow me to summarize what we've talked about so far. Unlike IT assets, business assets are seen for their impact on revenue and profit. The evolution of IT resulted in cheaper assets that were easier to administer and use by the casual user. This evolution has led to the decentralization of IT and IT's budget, making it more challenging to understand total cost of ownership and return on investment. All right, so what motivates an executive? Well, first of all, let's look at this statistic. The average tenure of a C-level executive is about 5 years. And that of a CIO is about 4 years. One company I worked for, I was there for 12 years. We went through 5 different presidents. Now ask yourself, how long does it take to implement an ITAM program? Well, that depends, right? But it does take years and requires continuous improvement and patience. Let's face it. An executive wannabe session plan, which is the path to executive management, probably doesn't go through ITAM. Even though ITAM would give a person an excellent view of the organization's operations and corporate law. Typically, that means the path to executive management is through business operations or sales, focusing on revenue and profit. Do you want to know what motivates your organization's executives? Take a look no further than their compensation package. For publicly held companies, it's kind of easy. For privately held companies, well, you got to watch how they behave and listen to what's important to them. For nonprofits, look at the services they provide and their charter. Taking a closer look at publicly held companies, implementing an ITAM program takes a back seat to executives' fiscal responsibility to their shareholders. Translation: increasing shareholder value through revenue and profit, which means promoting the ITAM program, became more difficult. When did you last see a stock market report featuring the ITAM program because of its impact on the company's stock price? Well, maybe if something went horribly wrong, but I've never seen one. I want you to think about the business assets that influence revenue and profit in your organization. You must tie the ITAM program to creating or maintaining shareholder value. Examples are increased profit through cost savings, improved revenue through a disciplined approach to acquiring IT that aligns with your business objectives and supporting corporate governance. Just because your company isn't publicly traded, though, doesn't mean you don't have shareholders. There are still company owners and maybe private investors. To summarize, the ITAM program implementation will span multiple executives based on industry executive tenure statistics. We also know the path to the top probably omits ITAM. As IT asset managers, we must understand how executives are compensated. Let's take a look at some strategies for engaging executive management. One of my favorite expressions is, luck is defined when preparation meets opportunity. Here's a true story. An IT asset manager at this global organization, and he was there for 10 years, they made very little progress in their ITAM program. About a year later, they got a new vice president. And one of the first things he asked was, "Where's your ITAM program?" The asset manager looked at me and said, "Keith, we've accomplished more in the last year than the previous 10 years. Preparation was they didn't give up. They kept working and kept moving forward over 10 years, albeit slow. The opportunity was a new vice president with the correct value system, the one that we dream of. Let's look at another true story. This organization was a hospital system. The ITAM manager told me the ITAM program was literally in the basement. That's actually where his office was. Nobody had any clue what was going on. Then the U.S. federal government created a program to help fund IT refreshes for hospitals. But of course, it came with strings attached. You needed to prove how the money was being spent, how the assets were used, and where they were located. Reasonable. Suddenly, his ITAM program was elevated to the top floor of the building, where he had weekly meetings with executives. Preparation in this case was the tools and processes that were in place. Opportunity was the U.S. federal program. And my last true story, after I completed my executive briefing, the executive approached me with the IT asset manager to tell me a story. So he said the IT asset manager came to him to tell him about how they lost 3 laptops. The executive smugly said to the IT asset manager, "Well, so much for your ITAM program working." To which the IT asset manager replied, "It is working. We know that we lost them, and we know what was on them. They were loaner laptops with no data, just standard software." The executive looked at me and said, "That's when I understood the value of ITAM. That's why even if things seem bleak or you're not getting that support, keep plugging away. Look at it this way. If nothing changes in your organization, you're gaining experience that looks good on your resume." And I really hate to say that, but you have to be aware of the situation in your company and how it's working. And the things you do should be of value to somebody else. Let's take a look at the 4 steps for engaging executive management. Step 1, define ITAM and its value to the organization in their terms. Step 2, an executive must own it. Someone must be willing to sponsor the ITAM program. And the rest of the executive team must acknowledge this ownership. Step 3, the executive team has to empower the ITAM program, meaning that the rest of the organization understands clearly your charter and what your goals are, who the sponsor is, and that it's a critical business function. Step 4, finally, that executive can return to doing what they did before. Not the bad stuff, but what they were concentrating on. And that you promise to keep them up to date, but you're not going to bug them every single minute, every single day. Why do this? Well, it's important because it acknowledges that while ITAM is a critical business function, it also acknowledges that the executives have other essential assets of business to monitor. So you must walk a tightrope of keeping them informed and engaged, but not becoming a burden. So those are the 4 steps. And they sound simple and easy, right? But we both know they're not. Defining ITAM and its value should be easy for any asset manager. If not, I've had a lot of experience doing that for organizations, and I can help you, so drop me a line. But how do we do this? Well, first of all, ask yourself a question. What does your organization do? Because that's what's going to drive how to define ITAM in your organization. How does ITAM's mission align with the organization's mission? When I did executive briefings, one of the first things I would do was look at the company's website to find out what's its mission, what do they do? That way I could align the briefing with that. Sometimes they had it there, nice and clear, or it could be under different headings. You know what we do for our customers or things like that, but what is the organization's mission? I've made a lot of mission statements with asset managers in the past, and there has to be a hierarchy of mission statements. A hierarchy, you say? I thought there was only one mission statement, Keith. Not so much. Nope, and for several good reasons. At the highest level is how the mission aligns with the organization's mission. Then you describe how ITAM aligns with each of the primary functional areas, such as finance, legal, IT, security, and anyone else that needs to be involved in the program. Creating these mission statements should not be about producing a piece of paper. It's about the ITAM team and how they communicate outside of the team. I want you to think about your organization's social network. Think about how LinkedIn works, where you build a network of connections. The next thing I want to talk to you about, I want to tell you a story about the 6 degrees of separation, also known as the Kevin Bacon game. Now, 6 degrees of separation means that anyone that I want to meet is no more than 5 people between me and that person. Thus, if you apply 6 degrees of separation theory, you identify the influencers or the people whom an executive listens to. These are the people who understand the executive, the people who can help elevate your ITAM program. Learn from them. These are the people you see around the executives all the time. And we're not talking about the ones who are around trying to get a promotion. We're talking about their confidence. So good news, bad news, both. Congratulations. You are in sales and marketing. This is exactly what vendors do when they're trying to get to the economic buyer. Now let's talk about what the ITAM team needs to do. First, they need to define the program scope. You need to include the program scope as part of this exercise. And there are going to be at least 2 scopes. What should the scope be when the program reaches full maturity? And then the starting scope, because let's face it, we're not going to be able to manage everything at the same time. Second, the requirements of the program that each department must fulfill. For example, what is required of accounts payable? Now, indeed, it's an easy example, invoices, but we have to understand the requirements to convey them to each department. It also helps executives understand each department's role and why it's so critical for them to sponsor this program. Executive management has to sign off on these requirements and announce their support. This gives the program some teeth so that when you go to finance or you go to IT and say this is the data that the program needs, there's a path for resolution to any pushback that may occur. Communicating and educating on the need for these requirements will make this easier. So when you're presenting them to the different departments, it should be in person. It should be a discussion, and most likely start with the head of the department because you don't want to blindside that guy if you plan on talking to other people. A mature ITAM program is not something that's going to happen overnight. You have to ease in because not every requirement can be fulfilled. For example, if you want to strengthen your software asset management program, one of the most critical things you need are the contracts or licensing agreements from legal and proof of purchase from accounts payable. That would be phase 1. Maybe in phase 2, finance provides chargeback accounts. Those are 2 simple examples. Define the roadmap based on requirements I just discussed. Include departments and your executive sponsor in this exercise, but don't expect them to participate in every meeting. Still, again, it helps to gain support, especially when you remind them of the benefits of ITAM using the mission statements discussed earlier. They may be more likely to cooperate when you ask somebody for something instead of telling them. Your program will go nowhere without a strategy. Executives look for that. What's the plan? The roadmap communicates this strategy to executives and the rest of the organization. How you're going to achieve this strategy, how long it's going to take, the effort and the costs. Review the roadmap frequently. The frequency depends on the rate of change, but at least annually, it's probably going to be more. The roadmap should extend out 5 years. Yes, you heard me right, 5 years. But the further out, the fuzzier the picture is. The level of detail is significantly less in year 5 than in year 1. In year 5, it's nice to have your dreams if everything goes right. And that's why you must revisit the roadmap to update it at least annually. Besides, before you know it, that year 5 will be year 1. Because the program matures over time, requirements will evolve. New asset types are added. The scope expands within asset types. Software is a perfect example of this. We have new software titles and new publishers, or we get rid of them. They're added and removed. We looked at the challenges faced in garnering executive support for ITAM initiatives and the importance of understanding executive motivations and crafting messages that resonate with their priorities. We highlighted the discrepancies in how IT assets are perceived compared to traditional business assets. While the latter are directly linked to revenue and profit, IT assets are often treated as secondary. The evolution of IT from mainframes to cloud computing and artificial intelligence has led to decentralized IT budgets, complicating the assessment of return on investment, total cost of ownership, and let's face it, value. Real-world examples such as Southwest Airlines meltdown and cybersecurity breaches underscore the consequences of neglecting IT infrastructure. Despite the critical role of IT in driving business operations and customer engagement, executives just haven't prioritized it. They haven't prioritized ITAM due to their focus on revenue and profit. Suggested strategies for engaging executive management included the value ITAM provides to shareholders, securing executive ownership, and empowerment of ITAM initiatives, and maintaining open communication channels. We stress the importance of aligning ITAM goals with organizational missions and involving key stakeholders in program development. The case studies I presented illustrated how perseverance and seizing opportunities can elevate the status of ITAM within an organization, leading to greater executive support. Finally, I outlined a 4-step approach to engaging executive management effectively, emphasizing the importance of long-term strategic plans and continuous program evaluation and adaptation. I can give you hundreds of valid reasons why executives don't support ITAM, but I can't give you a single valid reason to stop trying to promote ITAM to those same executives. As a token of my appreciation for your attention, I've created a worksheet that I think can help you, that you can use to create a plan to gain executive management support in your organization. It's free. It's a free resource, and you can go to the URL on the screen to access it. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I hope you found it highly informative, and please provide some feedback. If you would drop me a line, I'd love to connect. I'd love to talk ITAM, and I love to help people getting through the challenges that they face. So take care of yourself, and please, please keep learning.